pastor had a vision for an apologetics series, and we are going to start it today. So we're glad you're here. Welcome. Hopefully you're able to spend some time with us today, hearing good reasons for why we believe. So we're going to start out the first topic. My name is Ken. I serve at Live Church, and I'm glad that I can share with you today. The first topic we have today is why we believe there is a God. This is one of those questions that has been asked by people for many centuries. And it is really fundamental to our lives, the belief in God. And basically over the years, there's been two large camps of groups. There's people that are called theists, and those are people that believe in God. Then there are people that are called atheists, the A meaning not believing in God. You may say, well, what about the agnostics? Well, what I've found about agnostics is two things. One, most, if not all, agnostics act like they're atheists, and to not want to make a decision about this topic is just, to me, doesn't make any. There are certain things you have to make a decision about, and this is one of them. Whether there's a God or not is too big of a topic not to have an opinion about. So as we go through this, I wanted to share from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. It says, "Without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever does needs to believe that he exists and that he's a rewarder of those who seek him." The first part of that says they must believe that he exists. So the reality is the fundamental part of any belief system starts with believing, does God exist? And that is the big question. Now, theism itself could be one God, it could be multiple gods. But today what we're going to deal with, is there a God or is there not a God? God's existence is a fundamental matter of belief. But the question is, what evidence do we have? One of the questions we always deal with in apologetics is, what is the evidence? The question we always have is, why do you believe what you believe? We don't just say we believe something, we believe something for a reason. Now, you may have never thought about why you believe in God. You may have just always been told there was a God and you accepted that. But we believe there are good reasons for it. The first reason might seem a little odd at first, because sometimes things are so fundamental that we overlook them. The truth is, guess what? There is something rather than nothing. We live in a universe that has things in it. And some people may say, well, if there weren't anything in the universe, we wouldn't have this discussion. And I would say, I'd agree with you. But that's really not a good argument. The truth is, something existed. There was nothing, and then there was something. Why is there something? And what's interesting about the Bible actually says that God spoke and brought something out of nothing. The technical term, and I don't want to overwhelm you, is creation ex nihilo, which is a big word for meaning God took nothing and made something. Now, the reality is we have a lot of people in this world who can take something and turn it into something else. But the reality is I can't give you nothing and you make something out of it, but God can. And that's why the first fundamental reason we can believe that God is real, that there is a God, is that there is something. What's interesting about this fact is that science itself has all along dealt with this issue of why is something there. And in scientific literature, there were actually two big camps. There was a camp that said, well, everything in the universe has always existed. It just was always there. And then there was the group that said, no, there was at time nothing, and then something came into existence. The problem with that second group is everybody pretty much knows Genesis 1:1, and they know in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So the group over here didn't like the fact, they didn't want to connect with that belief, because it sounded like if there was a start to the universe, it corroborated what the Bible had to say, and they would want to do that. The good news is that science actually proved to us that the universe had a beginning. What's interesting is as we got better at looking farther and farther out into the universe, guess what happened? We realized that the universe is not static, it's growing. The universe continues to get bigger and bigger. And what did that tell us? The universe at some point started. There was a beginning. And so the question then is, how did that happen? And that's a valid question. If you were to see a beautiful work of art on a wall, you would ask rightly, who painted that? Or if you saw a beautiful piece of furniture, you would rightly say, who made it? You wouldn't just say, well, that just sort of came into existence. And yet, for the atheist, the best the atheist can do is kind of say, well, it just sort of happened. One of my favorite, strangely enough, one of my favorite authors is Stephen Hawking. And you might say, why Stephen Hawking? Well, he's a guy who really, when you read him, he's a very smart guy to start with. And he has got back to where the universe started in a singularity. And what I find fascinating about this singularity is there was no time, and the laws of nature didn't even exist. The laws of physics didn't exist. And the more I read that, the more I thought, that sounds a lot like God before he created. I realized that sometimes science gets the answer sort of in reverse. And as I was reading that, I realized essentially that's what God did. God always has existed. But when God spoke the universe into existence, everything that we know around us, all the laws we have, even time itself, came into existence. When I was in school getting my degree, there was a question on one of our tests, and I enjoyed it because the instructor asked, what was God doing before he created the universe? And he actually said there were two good answers to that. One was that he was enjoying just the fellowship of God and the plurality of God. The other was, the question doesn't make sense because time didn't exist before God made it. Before that, there was no time. So what's amazing to me is how often, as we search for clues through good science, we come back to the fact that the best explanation for everything we see is God. That God beginning everything. And so he put everything into existence. So everything you see around us is there. What's interesting is the Apostle Paul actually made this same argument. He said in Romans that you should be able to look at everything around you, the beautiful mountains, the amazing things that you see, and know that something about God just from what he made. And we do this. Like, as I said, if you see something really beautiful and you think, oh, somebody made that, you learn about the person who made it. A sculpture, a piece of art, a beautiful chair. You understand something about the person who made it before you even meet them because you see what they've made. In the same way, we should be able to look at the universe and say, learn something about God in that. Now, it doesn't tell us everything about God, but it does tell us some things about God. It tells us what that is. What's amazing about this, as good as the creation is, as amazing as this creation is, there's even more. Sometimes we say, even more. The laws of nature, in Psalm 104, God says that he makes the sun and the moon operate. And the reality is, the laws of nature, all the things that we rely on to do good science, to get up in the morning. Every one of us, when we got up this morning, assumed that we would be in the same place with the same laws of nature. Gravity hadn't changed. The sun came up like it always has. Well, that doesn't just happen. That happens because God has an order to everything. God has ordered the world in a certain way. And the cool thing is that we can rely upon it. In fact, good science relies upon that. Good science says, I can do an experiment today, and guess what? Tomorrow I can do that same experiment, and I'll get the same answer because the universe didn't suddenly change overnight. All the laws didn't say. Well, that is because we have a God of order who created everything that we see. So we see the more we get into details, the more we start to say, hey, this is making more sense that a God created everything, set everything in order, and we can rely upon that. And sometimes the very things that we assume will always be true are only true because God is the one, as he said, God is saying, I did this, I did this. Well, even more, as we said, complexity of our planet. In Job 38 and 39, God goes into great detail about how he made everything. And he says, he begins to talk to Job about how he did this and how he did that and how he created all this complexity. We are an amazing people. Our planet is an amazing thing. For those of you who don't know, our planet is in the perfect place for us to have life. It is in the perfect place for us to see the glory of God wherever it is around us. Our planet is in the perfect place so that we have this huge moon. If everybody wonders, this moon we have that we get to see every night is not normal. It's unique in the universe. In our solar system, we have a big planet called Jupiter. What is the reason for that? It protects us from so many things. We have so many unique things about our planet that enable us. We're in a perfect place for life. Now, some may say, well, that's a good, lucky thing that we do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive. But I believe a better explanation of that is we have a God who placed us in the perfect place in order to have life and also to recognize his life. There's two things that God has done for us. Not only has he put us in a perfect place so that we can live the best life possible, but he also has put us in the perfect place to be able to see his majesty. Any of you who've ever been out into the desert, say, and seen all the stars, or been able to look through a telescope and seen the beautiful Milky Way or the various astronomical things, it's amazing that we can see these things. And they are signs of the glory of God. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God. And so what's amazing is the complexity of the life we live, the things that we are. All of these point to something bigger than ourselves, point to something that is best explained by a God who has created everything we see, that has a purpose behind everything we see, knows everything we see. But even better, you know, what's interesting, we live in an amazing age where we're learning so much about our own bodies. Our human bodies, sometimes we look at a human body and think, that's not very, but our human bodies are so complex. They're amazing machines. They are made so beautifully. And we all know that when we go to the hospital because something breaks, but it's amazing how intricate everything is, and everything flows beautifully together, and everything is powered. Well, inside our bodies, we have something called DNA. And to be honest, until very recently, we didn't know a lot about DNA. And really, even only in the last maybe 10, 15 years, we've learned so much about DNA and the way it works and the various details of DNA. What's amazing is I learned that one string of DNA in our body has more information than multiple libraries, you know. And my question to you is, where did all that information come from? What we know about our universe is information either doesn't add or subtract, it stays the same. So the question is, where did all this information come from? Well, I believe the best solution to that is a God who knows all things. And a God who knows all things could pour all that detail in so that my body can run properly. So that when I move my arm up like this, what's interesting is my father had the sad thing of having something called Parkinson's disease. And the problem is that he would send a message from his brain, but it wouldn't get to his arm. So when we normally do this, the problem was something wasn't working. But see, I can do that. Amazing. I can tell my leg to move, I can tell my mouth to move, I can tell my arms to move, and it moves because we have all this information stored inside our bodies. That is an amazing thing. That is a powerful thing. And see, all of these things about the universe, of creation, of everything we're doing, points to something bigger. And what's interesting is usually the arguments between the atheist and the theist come down to this distinction. The atheist basically would agree with pretty much everything I've said, but would argue that, well, that's just the way things are. You know, we're fortunate that we live where we do. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here. It's fortunate that we are as complex as we are. It's fortunate, but there's no real meaning to it all. And at the end of the day, I'd ask you, which understanding of the world, one, makes the most sense, and two, gives us meaning in our lives? Because sadly, one thing we see is the more we point toward an atheistic position, not believing in God, the more people become discouraged, because the point is, what is the point? I mean, if literally you live on the world and then you die, ultimately, and you see sometimes some of these where they're trying to say, well, I'm here to advance the species. Well, ultimately, the species is going to die out. So the question is, what is there really? And we're going to be talking in later ones about what it means, the fact that there is a God, as far as our future, as far as our purpose. But ultimately, the theist position not only explains everything around us, I believe, better, but also gives us hope. It gives us a reason for living. It gives us meaning to our lives, and so much so that I believe people will often say, oh, well, it's just a crutch. And partly I would say, well, if you need a crutch is a very useful thing to have. But at the same time, yes, because it really does give meaning to our lives. As we're going to be closing here, one of the things that we've all experienced in our lives, and I believe this is true, and in Romans, Paul says, all authority is from God ultimately. All of us have had this experience of doing something wrong. I don't mean doing something that we knew we broke the law. I don't mean even doing something that basically we thought we'd get caught. When we did something, we knew it was wrong. And many of us call it conscience. And the best explanation for that is that it is God who created us like himself, with an understanding of the way the world works. And so when we did something wrong, we knew we were accountable. And ultimately, I believe it's that accountability that causes the atheist not to want to believe there's a God. Because if there's accountability, then I'm accountable to someone. I'm accountable for my life. My choices have to matter because I'm ultimately accountable to somebody. The theist position does say that if there's a God, then he's created a certain set of rules of the way the world works, and that we're accountable, if we're created by that God, for living in a certain way. And some people don't want to be accountable. They don't want to come under the authority of someone else. But ultimately, if you think about all of our laws, everything we do in the world, everything that orders and structures our society is based on that accountability. And what the argument Paul makes is that God has given the authority to those over us, and that when we come under that authority, even if we don't agree with it sometimes, we are coming under his authority. We're coming under his rule. We are coming under what he has to say about things. And that is true in our lives. And so all of that indicates that we aren't just a mistake. We didn't just come into existence. We are created by a God for a specific purpose. We have meaning and structure in our life because of who he is. Well, finally, and this is probably the most exciting thing for those of us who are Christians, this is something that we say that no other group can say. God has come to the planet. God has visited our planet personally. Approximately 2,000 years ago, a man named Jesus Christ, it says God became flesh and dwelt among us. So probably the greatest reason we should believe there's a God is he's actually been here. People saw him. John talks about he touched him, he felt him, he experienced God in the flesh. And so ultimately, Jesus is the ultimate proof that there is a God that we can rely upon, that we can know and trust and believe. He is the reason we do that. And so next time, that's why we're going to be talking about why we believe the Christian view of God is the true God, because of who Jesus is. So I want to thank you for joining us today. I thank you for taking the time to be with us. I thank you. I pray that you'll take this and pray over it. I pray that you'll spend some time, ask some questions, think about what's going on. Talk to somebody about this. We're going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions, and ultimately we want you to be able to really dig into this, because these are good reasons for why we believe. And I pray that you've enjoyed this. And as I said, next time we're going to be talking about why the Christian God is the one true God. Thank you for joining us today, and God bless you.